There are certain looks people give you when they believe you've crossed a line. Not angry, not frightened, just tired. That was the look my son gave me the night he stood in my kitchen and quietly said, "Mom, you treat us like suspects. We can't live like this anymore." No shouting, no slammed doors, just silence so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming behind me. His wife Emily folded her arms and offered the smile she always used when she wanted to sound reasonable. "We love you, Linda. We really do. But every conversation feels like an interrogation. You notice every receipt, every phone call, every little inconsistency. We deserve some privacy." Privacy, funny word. I had spent 23 years as a detective in the Financial Crimes Division. People rarely lied with their mouths. They lied with numbers, with timing, with signatures, with stories that changed by half an inch every time they were repeated. When you've interviewed hundreds of fraudsters, you stop listening to words. You watch patterns. Apparently, that habit had followed me into retirement. At least, that's what everyone believed. For months, Emily joked about it in front of friends. "Don't leave your purse around Linda. She'll have a full investigation opened before dessert." Everyone laughed. Even I laughed. Because maybe they were right. Maybe retirement hadn't really retired me. Maybe I did ask too many questions. Maybe I did notice things other people ignored. My son, Jason, insisted I was making their marriage harder. Emily claimed I couldn't accept that he was an adult. Even my sister once told me, "You don't have to solve every mystery anymore." I started wondering if they all saw something I couldn't. So I tried changing. I stopped asking where they had been, stopped commenting on strange withdrawals, stopped mentioning documents left open on the kitchen counter, stopped finishing sentences when I already knew where they were heading. I told myself families weren't investigations. Families were supposed to run on trust. Then, 3 weeks later, I noticed something so small that almost anyone else would have missed it. One sentence, one signature, one date that didn't belong. Not because I was suspicious, because I had spent more than 2 decades training my eyes never to ignore details that everyone else overlooked. That tiny mistake was the first loose thread. By the time I pulled it, everything my son and his wife believed was safely hidden began to unravel. And before the sun came up the next morning, I made one phone call, a call I had hoped I would never have to make. My name is Linda Thomas. I am 47 years old, and for 23 of those years, I worked as a detective in the Financial Crimes Division. People often imagine detectives chasing armed robbers or interrogating killers beneath flickering lights. That wasn't my world. Mine was quieter. Fraud, forgery, identity theft, corporate embezzlement. The kind of crimes where nobody raised their voice because everyone believed paper could hide the truth. It can't. Every lie leaves a fingerprint. Sometimes it's a missing signature. Sometimes it's money arriving 2 days too early. Sometimes it's a person who explains something before you've even asked the question. That's the mistake guilty people make. Honest people answer. Dishonest people prepare. By the time I retired, I could often tell whether someone was lying before they finished their second sentence. It wasn't a gift. It was repetition. Thousands of interviews, thousands of reports, thousands of tiny details that eventually taught my brain to recognize patterns without asking permission. My husband Michael used to tease me about it. "You could probably solve a crime in the grocery store." I usually did. I'd notice the cashier giving the wrong change before anyone else. I'd spot fake charity collectors from across a parking lot. I'd recognize forged signatures without even trying. Michael found it amusing. He was the only person who never asked me to stop being the detective I had become. We met when we were 24. He was a firefighter, calm, patient, the kind of man who believed every problem could be solved over coffee. He balanced every sharp edge I had. When I wanted evidence, he wanted understanding. When I wanted answers, he reminded me to listen first. For 20 years somehow, we made each other better. Cancer took him in 11 months, fast enough to steal our future, slow enough for both of us to understand exactly what we were losing. That was 5 years ago. After his funeral, Jason changed. Not overnight. People rarely do. Grief doesn't always break families in one dramatic moment. Sometimes it erodes them, one ordinary conversation at a time. He called less, visited less, canceled dinners, forgot birthdays. Each excuse sounded reasonable by itself. Together, they formed a pattern. Then Emily entered the picture. She was intelligent, confident, always perfectly dressed. She hugged people with one arm, smiled without showing her eyes. Everyone adored her. She volunteered at charity events, remembered every birthday, brought homemade desserts to family gatherings. She looked like the kind of woman every mother hopes her son will marry. I wanted Jason to be happy, so I ignored the small things, the conversations that stopped when I entered the room, the documents turned upside down on the table, the way Emily answered questions Jason should have answered himself. I told myself I was imagining it. After all, I was retired now. Not every inconsistency meant a crime. Not every uneasy feeling deserved an investigation. That's what I kept repeating to myself. Until one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, Emily made a mistake no experienced liar should ever make. And once I saw it, I couldn't pretend I hadn't. Tuesday afternoons were predictable. Emily worked from home. Jason usually didn't return until after 6. I stopped by their house around 3 to drop off a toolbox that had belonged to Michael. Jason had mentioned over the weekend that he needed one for a small repair in the garage. I knocked. Emily answered almost immediately. "Oh, Linda, I didn't know you were coming." Her smile arrived half a second late. "I was just in the neighborhood," I said, lifting the old metal toolbox. "Thought Jason could use this." She stepped aside. "Of course." The house smelled of fresh coffee and lemon cleaner. Spotless, almost unnaturally so. Emily was the kind of person who believed a perfectly organized home reflected a perfectly organized life. We exchanged polite conversation while she placed the toolbox near the hallway closet. "I'll make tea," she offered. "You don't have to," I insist. As she disappeared into the kitchen, I remained in the living room, looking through the large front window toward the backyard Michael had once helped Jason landscape. Everything looked exactly as it always had, until my eyes landed on the dining table. A single folder, dark blue, half open. Most people would never have noticed it, neither would I, before 23 years in financial crimes. I wasn't trying to read it. In fact, I deliberately looked away. Old habits, that's all they were. Then Emily called from the kitchen. "Linda, could you grab my phone? I think I left it on the table." I turned. Her phone lay beside the folder. As I reached for it, one loose page shifted from the air moving around me. Only an inch, just enough. One line became visible. "Property transfer authorization." I froze, not because of the title, because of the date. It had been typed in one format, then corrected by hand. Small, neat, blue ink. People rarely alter dates unless timing matters. I handed Emily her phone without another glance. She smiled warmly. "Thank you." We drank tea, talked about the weather, about Jason's long hours, about my vegetable garden. Nothing unusual. Yet the entire time, Emily kept checking whether the folder was still exactly where she'd left it. Every few minutes. Just a quick glance, almost unconscious. Most people would never notice that either. I did. When I left, she hugged me. "I'm glad you stopped by." "So am I." Neither of us meant it. Driving home, I kept replaying that handwritten date in my mind. Maybe it was nothing. A corrected typo, a harmless document. Exactly the kind of thing Jason had begged me to stop overthinking. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had almost convinced myself to let it go. Then my phone rang. It was Jason. "Mom?" His voice sounded strangely tense. "Were you at the house today?" "Yes." A pause. What did you see? Not, what did you do? Not, how was Emily? Just one question. What did you see? In 23 years as a detective, I had learned one simple truth. People don't ask that question unless they're already afraid there's something to see. And in that moment, for the first time in months, my instincts stopped whispering. They started shouting. I saw exactly what you think I saw, I answered. The silence on the other end lasted long enough for me to hear Jason breathing. Then he laughed. Not naturally, the kind of laugh people use when they're trying to convince themselves everything is under control. It isn't what you think. I haven't said what I think. Another pause. Emily gets nervous when people see unfinished paperwork. That makes sense. It does. It does if it's actually unfinished. He didn't respond. Instead, he changed the subject. Are you coming for dinner Sunday? I hadn't planned on it. You should. His invitation sounded less like affection and more like damage control. After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen for several minutes, staring at the old coffee mug Michael had used every morning for nearly 20 years. He used to tell me there were only two reasons innocent people rush to explain themselves: fear or guilt, sometimes both. I wanted to believe Jason was simply trying to protect his wife. That would have been easier. But my instincts kept circling one detail. He hadn't asked whether I had read the document. He hadn't asked what it was. He had asked what I had seen. That meant he already knew exactly which document I was talking about. Sunday dinner had once been our family tradition. After Michael died, I fought to keep it alive. For a while, it worked. Then life became too busy. Dinner moved from every Sunday to once a month. Then birthdays. Then holidays. Now, suddenly, Jason wanted everyone together again. Emily greeted me with exaggerated warmth. "Linda, I'm so happy you came." Her smile was flawless. Her eyes weren't. The dining table looked like something from a magazine. Roast chicken, fresh bread, candles, matching plates. Everything carefully arranged. Too carefully. People trying to repair relationships often overcompensate. Emily certainly had. Halfway through dinner, she placed her hand over Jason's. "I think we should finally say what's been bothering us." Jason looked uncomfortable. She didn't. "Linda, we love you." Whenever a conversation begins that way, prepare yourself. But there it was. "We've been talking about boundaries." I nodded. Emily continued gently. "You notice everything. You ask about our finances. You ask where we've been. You ask why we bought something. You even noticed a document sitting on our table." Jason looked down at his plate. Emily never looked away from me. "It doesn't feel like family," she said quietly. "It feels like an investigation." No one spoke. Even the clock in the hallway seemed louder. Finally, Jason sighed. "Mom, I know you don't mean any harm, but we need our own life. We need you to trust us." Trust, such a simple word. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup before answering. "I've spent my entire adult life trusting evidence." Emily smiled politely. "And that's exactly the problem." For a moment, I wondered if she was right. Maybe retirement had never really happened. Maybe I was still chasing ghosts. Maybe I owed them an apology. Then Emily reached for the serving bowl. Her sleeve slid back just enough for me to notice a faint streak of blue ink across the side of her hand. The same shade, the same type of pen that had corrected the handwritten date on the property document. Most people wouldn't have remembered the color. I did. And in that instant, every doubt I had been fighting disappeared. Someone had altered that paperwork. The question was no longer whether. The only question left was why. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I believed Jason and Emily were committing a crime, because I couldn't decide whether I wanted to prove myself wrong. People imagine detectives enjoy uncovering the truth. They don't, not when the truth has your son's face. The next morning, I opened the small cedar box Michael had built for me years earlier. Inside were dozens of old notebooks. I had started keeping them during my second year as a detective. Nothing confidential, just observations, lessons, patterns. After retirement, the habit remained. Birthdays, appointments, promises people made, conversations that felt important enough to remember. Michael used to call them my external memory. I flipped through the most recent notebook, 3 months earlier. Jason had stopped by for coffee. "Emily's thinking about starting her own business," he'd said. "What kind of business?" "She's still figuring it out." 2 months earlier, Emily mentioned they had spoken with a financial advisor. When I asked which firm, she answered immediately. Too immediately. Most people remember advice. Liars remember rehearsed details. Then she changed the subject before I could ask another question. 6 weeks earlier, Jason borrowed Michael's old filing cabinet. He said they needed more room for tax documents. That struck me as odd. Neither of them had ever cared much about paperwork before. At the time, I ignored it. Now, every ordinary moment seemed to point toward the same destination. I closed the notebook. This wasn't evidence, it was only a pattern. Patterns are dangerous. They can reveal the truth, or they can convince you of something that isn't there. I refused to become one of those retired detectives who saw conspiracies everywhere, so I made myself a promise. No assumptions, no accusations, only facts. If facts never appeared, the matter would end there. 3 days later, Emily called unexpectedly. "Linda, could you watch Oliver on Saturday afternoon? Their 6-year-old son, my grandson. The babysitter canceled." Of course! Oliver arrived carrying his favorite dinosaur backpack and enough energy to power the neighborhood. For 4 hours, we built castles from cardboard boxes, baked chocolate chip cookies, and searched the backyard for imaginary fossils. Children have a way of making the world feel honest again. Then, while drawing dinosaurs at the kitchen table, Oliver looked up at me. "Grandma?" "Yes?" "Mom says we might get a new house." The pencil stopped moving in my hand. "A new house?" He nodded enthusiastically. "The one with the really big yard." "I thought your mommy liked this house. She says we can't tell anybody yet." He covered his own mouth dramatically. "Oops. Children don't keep secrets. Adults borrow them." I smiled as naturally as I could. "That sounds exciting." "It is." He returned to coloring without another thought. But I couldn't. Jason and Emily had never mentioned moving. Not once. And unless something had changed very recently, they couldn't possibly afford a larger home. Not with Jason's salary alone. Not after Emily left her marketing job last year. The numbers simply didn't fit. That evening, when Jason picked Oliver up, I said nothing. Neither did he. But as he loaded the backpack into the car, I noticed a folded envelope sticking out of the side pocket. Across the top, in bold blue letters, were 3 words. C.O. Confidential. Property. File. Jason saw where I was looking. Without a word, he quietly turned the envelope upside down before closing the zipper. He thought he had hidden it. What he didn't realize was that he just confirmed the one thing I had been trying so desperately not to believe. For the next 48 hours, I did absolutely nothing. That may sound strange. Most people think detectives solve cases by chasing leads. The good ones don't. The good ones wait. Because guilty people almost always make a second mistake. The first mistake is usually accidental. The second one comes from believing they escaped the first. Friday morning, I drove to the county records office, not as an investigator, just as a citizen. Property records are public, always have been. The young clerk smiled politely. "What address?" I gave Jason's. She typed for less than 10 seconds before frowning. What is it?" "There was an ownership inquiry open last week." My heart skipped. "An inquiry?" She nodded. "It hasn't been finalized yet. Can I see the public filing?" "I'm sorry." "Not until it's officially recorded." I thanked her and walked back to my car. An ownership inquiry. That explained the document, but it didn't explain why no one had mentioned it, or why they seemed terrified that I had seen even a single page. That evening, Emily invited me over for dinner again. Too soon, too eager, almost as if she wanted to prove everything was perfectly normal. Jason was quieter than usual. Oliver spent most of dinner telling me about dinosaurs and soccer practice. Emily carried the conversation. She always had. Near dessert, she smiled warmly. "So, Linda, have you been keeping busy?" "A little." "Still organizing your old detective notebooks?" Jason looked up immediately. Only for a second. But it was enough. Emily noticed his reaction. "So did I. They're mostly memories now," I answered. "I imagine they contain quite a lot." "They do." She stirred her coffee. "I guess it's hard to stop collecting information. It becomes a habit." She smiled again. "But habits can make people suspicious of things that aren't there." I met her eyes. "They can." Neither of us blinked. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Then Oliver ran into the kitchen carrying a toy airplane. "Dad! Dad, I found your folder!" Every muscle in Jason's body tightened. "What folder, buddy?" "The blue one." Oliver held up the same dark blue folder I'd seen earlier that week. Emily stood so quickly her chair scraped across the hardwood floor. "Oh, sweetheart," she laughed far too loudly. "That's just boring grown-up paperwork." She took the folder from his hands almost instantly. Too instantly. As she turned, one sheet slipped halfway out. For less than a second, I saw my own name, Linda Thomas, printed in bold letters. Emily shoved the paper back before anyone else seemed to notice. Anyone else. I noticed. I said nothing. Finished my coffee, complimented the pie, kissed Oliver goodnight, thanked them for dinner, and drove home. The entire trip, one question echoed inside my head. Why would my name appear inside a property file that they insisted had nothing to do with me? At home, I unlocked Michael's old desk. The bottom drawer still contained documents we hadn't touched since before his death, insurance policies, mortgage papers, our wills, and one thick envelope marked in his handwriting. Property. Property. Crop. I hadn't opened it in years. Slowly, I unfolded the documents. The deed, the purchase agreement, every amendment, every signature. Then I reached the final page. I stared at it for nearly a full minute. Not because it answered my questions, because it created one much bigger. Someone had been trying to transfer rights they did not legally own. And if they had continued without realizing what Michael and I had signed years ago, their entire plan was about to collapse. Before sunrise the next morning, I finally admitted something to myself. This wasn't my detective instincts refusing to retire. This was exactly the kind of fraud I had spent 23 years investigating. The only difference was that this time, the suspects shared my last name. I left the documents spread across my dining room table until dawn. Not because I needed more time to understand them, because I needed time to accept them. Michael and I had purchased the house together 19 years earlier, but after Jason married, we refinanced it for one simple reason. The interest rates had dropped. Our attorney suggested something else while we were signing the new paperwork. "If one of you passes away," he had said, "you may want additional protection before transferring ownership to the next generation." Michael listened carefully. He always did. "What kind of protection?" "A survivorship agreement with a recorded restriction. It keeps anyone from transferring or using the property as collateral unless the surviving owner personally authorizes it." Michael looked at me before answering. "Do it." At the time, it seemed like another routine legal precaution. Neither of us imagined we'd ever need it. 5 years later, after Michael's funeral, I became the sole legal owner. Jason never asked about the paperwork. Neither did I. He simply assumed that one day, when I was ready, the house would naturally become his, and perhaps it would have, if he'd simply waited. The property file I'd seen at his house suddenly made perfect sense. Someone had tried to prepare documents before asking the one person whose signature actually mattered. Mine. That explained the secrecy. It explained Emily's nervousness. It explained Jason's phone call. But one question remained. Why? Selling the house without my permission was impossible. Using it as collateral was impossible. Transferring ownership was impossible. Unless they believed something that wasn't true. People committing financial fraud almost always make the same mistake. They assume they understand the paperwork better than they actually do. That overconfidence is usually where everything falls apart. At exactly 8,003 Monday morning, I made the phone call I'd been avoiding. Good morning, Harrison and Cole Legal. I'd like to speak with Rebecca Cole. May I tell her who's calling? Linda Thomas. There was a brief pause. Then the receptionist's voice softened. One moment, Miss Thomas. Rebecca answered almost immediately. Linda. She recognized my voice before I finished saying hello. It had been nearly 4 years since we'd spoken. Rebecca wasn't an old family friend. She had been the attorney who handled Michael's estate. More importantly, she was the lawyer who had insisted on adding that survivorship restriction all those years ago. I hoped I wouldn't need to call you, I said. I was hoping the same. Her answer caught me off guard. You expected this? I expected someone to misunderstand those documents eventually. I closed my eyes. So I'm not imagining this. No. Her voice remained calm. But before we assume anything, I want facts, not feelings. Exactly what I needed to hear. I explained everything. The blue folder, the altered dates, Oliver mentioning a new house, the property inquiry, my name appearing inside their file. Rebecca interrupted only once. Did you sign anything recently? No. Any power of attorney? No. Any electronic authorization? Never. She was quiet for a moment. Then I heard her turning pages. I'd like you to bring every original property document you have. When? Today. And Rebecca, yes? If someone prepared transfer documents without legal authority, she finished my sentence. K. Then someone has a much bigger problem than they realize. Her tone wasn't dramatic. It was clinical, the way surgeons discuss complicated operations, or detectives discuss evidence. Before hanging up, she added one final sentence. Linda, yes? From this point forward, don't confront anyone. Why? Because if they're doing what I think they're doing, she paused, they're about to start making mistakes much faster. I looked at the folder on my table. For the first time since Michael died, I wasn't looking at my son as family. I was looking at him as someone standing dangerously close to committing a crime. And those were never the same thing. Rebecca's office hadn't changed in 10 years. The same oak bookshelves, the same brass lamp on the corner of her desk, the same framed photograph of her father, who had founded the firm nearly 50 years earlier. Only one thing was different. The smile she usually greeted me with never appeared. Instead, she opened a thick legal folder and motioned for me to sit. Let's start from the beginning. I handed her every original document Michael and I had kept. She put on a pair of reading glasses and spent nearly 20 minutes saying almost nothing. She compared signatures, checked recording numbers, highlighted paragraphs, turned pages back and forth, occasionally making a small note in the margin. The room was silent except for the sound of paper. Finally, she leaned back. They've made 2 mistakes. I waited. The first is serious. The second is catastrophic. My stomach tightened. Rebecca slid one document across the desk. This restriction was properly recorded with the county 5 years ago. I nodded. Any attorney handling a legitimate transfer should have found it immediately. So why didn't they? They either never hired a competent real estate attorney or they weren't planning to. The word settled heavily between us. Rebecca continued. The ownership inquiry you mentioned tells me someone has already begun gathering documents. But they can't complete anything. Correct. She pointed to a single paragraph. The property cannot be transferred, pledged, refinanced, or used as collateral without your written authorization, witnessed and notarized. I never signed anything. I know. She closed the folder. So whatever they're trying to accomplish has already failed. That should have relieved me. It didn't. If it's already failed, why haven't they stopped? Rebecca folded her hands. Because they don't know it's failed. She stood and walked toward the window overlooking the courthouse square. Linda, financial fraud often follows the same pattern. People tell one lie, then another. They spend so much energy protecting the first lie that they never notice reality moving away from them. She turned back toward me. If Jason and Emily believe this property is available to them, they're probably making financial decisions based on that belief. What kind of decisions? Rebecca answered without hesitation. Loans, purchase agreements, deposits, commitments, promises made using money they don't actually control. My pulse quickened. Oliver's words echoed in my mind. We're getting a new house. They weren't dreaming, they were planning. Rebecca reached for the phone. I'm going to order certified copies of every filing connected to your property. Can they do that without notifying me? They can request documents. They cannot change ownership, not legally. She looked directly at me. But I want to know exactly who requested them. Can we find out? Usually. What if someone forged my signature? Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at me with the same expression detectives sometimes wore before delivering difficult news. I hope they didn't. And if they did? She slowly removed her glasses. Then this stops being a civil matter. The room felt colder, not because I was afraid, because I knew exactly what those words meant. Forgery, fraud, false filing, potential criminal charges. Against strangers, I had investigated cases like that dozens of times. Against my own son, I couldn't even imagine it. Rebecca broke the silence. I don't believe Jason is the architect. You think Emily is? I don't know, and I refuse to guess. She gathered the documents into a new folder. We'll let evidence answer that. As I stood to leave, she handed me a business card. On the back, she had written just one sentence. Do not discuss the property with anyone. If they realize you've discovered the restriction, she said quietly, they'll change their behavior. And if they don't, she gave the smallest nod, they'll continue revealing exactly what they're trying to do. For the first time in my career, I found myself hoping the evidence would prove me wrong. Deep down, I already knew it wouldn't. 3 days passed, no phone calls, no unexpected visits, no dramatic confrontations. If Rebecca hadn't been working quietly behind the scenes, I might have convinced myself the entire matter had simply faded away. Then my phone rang. Linda, Rebecca said without greeting, we received the county records. I closed the book I had been pretending to read. And there were 2 document requests. From who? One was submitted by a licensed real estate office. That's normal. Yes. The second wasn't. Silence settled between us. It came through an online document preparation service. I frowned. People use those all the time. They do, for simple paperwork. She paused. They're also popular with people trying to avoid paying an attorney. That explained why no lawyer had noticed the ownership restriction. Someone had tried to prepare everything themselves. Can you tell who submitted it? No, but I can tell when. She gave me the exact date. It was the Tuesday before I visited Jason's house, the same week I had seen the blue folder, the same week Emily had corrected that handwritten date. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Saturday afternoon, Jason called unexpectedly. Mom, hi, I was wondering if you'd like to come over tomorrow. Another invitation. The third in less than 2 weeks. What for? Nothing special. Emily's voice floated through the background. Tell her we'll make her favorite pie. Jason repeated it almost word for word. Something about the conversation felt rehearsed. I'll think about it. We'd really like you there. His voice sounded almost hopeful, as though tomorrow mattered for reasons he couldn't explain. When we ended the call, I immediately phoned Rebecca. "They're inviting me over again." She didn't sound surprised. "Go. You think it's connected? I think they're preparing for something." "What should I do?" "The same thing you've done your entire career. Observe. Don't accuse. Don't volunteer information. Simply watch." Sunday arrived warm and unusually quiet. Emily welcomed me with another flawless smile. Oliver ran straight into my arms. Jason seemed distracted. He checked his phone every few minutes. Waiting. For what? Lunch passed without incident, until dessert. Emily placed a stack of papers on the dining table. Casually, almost carelessly. "Oh," she laughed, "I completely forgot these were here." She reached toward them, then stopped. "Actually," she looked at Jason. "Since Linda's here," Jason swallowed, "we wanted to ask your opinion." There it was, not an accident, a performance. Emily opened the folder. Inside were glossy photographs of a beautiful two-story house. Large porch, corner lot, freshly renovated. Oliver clapped excitedly. "That's our new house," Emily smiled. "We're thinking about making an offer." Thinking, not buying. Thinking. Jason slid one photograph toward me. "What do you think? It's beautiful." Emily nodded. "It really is." Then she added the sentence I'd been expecting. "We've already spoken with the lender, not H lender." The lender, meaning negotiations had already begun. I smiled politely. "I'm happy for you." Jason looked relieved, too relieved. Emily studied my face carefully, waiting for questions, waiting for suspicion, waiting for Detective Linda Thomas to appear. Instead, I asked only one thing. "When do you plan to move?" Emily answered instantly. "As soon as the paperwork clears." Paperwork, such an interesting choice of words. Not financing, not closing. Paperwork. She wasn't talking about the new house. She was talking about something else, something she believed would soon be completed. And judging by the confidence in her voice, she still had no idea that every document she was counting on had already become completely worthless. I left their house that afternoon with the same smile I'd arrived with. Warm, relaxed, supportive. Emily hugged me at the front door. "I'm so glad you're happy for us. I only want you and Jason to be happy." It wasn't a lie. The happiness I wanted for my son simply didn't include fraud. Monday morning, Rebecca called before I had finished my first cup of coffee. "They've done it." My stomach tightened. "What?" "They submitted the purchase offer." "For the new house?" "Yes." "And?" "They listed assets they don't legally control." I closed my eyes. "So they committed to something they can't actually finance." "Exactly." Rebecca paused. "But that's not why I called." My heart sank. "There's more." "There always is." She took a slow breath. "We obtained copies of the preliminary transaction documents." "How?" "The seller's attorney contacted the title company." "And?" "There are references to your property throughout the financing package." I felt the room grow quiet around me. "My property?" "They're presenting it as the source of equity that will support the purchase." I didn't speak. Rebecca continued. "They're not claiming ownership, not directly, but they're representing to multiple parties that control of the property is only a matter of paperwork." "So, they're gambling." "Yes, they've built an entire financial plan on the assumption that you'll eventually sign." "And if I don't?" "The entire chain collapses." For the first time since Michael died, I opened the photo album we had kept in the living room. Jason at 6, covered in mud after trying to build a treehouse. Jason graduating high school. Jason standing beside me the day he became a police cadet before deciding the job wasn't for him. Michael always believed our son would become an honest man. He had, for most of his life. Where had that young man gone? Or had he simply allowed someone else to make decisions he knew were wrong? Rebecca's voice echoed in my memory. "Don't assume. Follow the evidence." Evidence, not emotion, That evening, my phone began vibrating. Emily. I let it ring. A voicemail appeared. Linda, we forgot to ask you something today. Nothing urgent. Call me when you have a minute. 5 minutes later, Jason called. Mom, Emily just needs your opinion about one document. One document. Interesting. I didn't answer. Another voicemail. Then a text. Can you stop by tomorrow? It'll only take 5 minutes. 5 minutes. No explanation. No details. Only urgency. I forwarded the messages to Rebecca. She called almost immediately. They're accelerating. What does that mean? They're running out of time. For what? The purchase contract. She had already anticipated my next question. In most transactions, buyers have only a limited window to satisfy financing conditions. If they're asking for your help now, they're under pressure. I looked at Jason's message again. 5 minutes, one document, my signature. I suddenly knew exactly what tomorrow would be. Not a family visit, not coffee, not reconciliation, an ambush. Rebecca spoke calmly. I want you to go. You do? Absolutely. And if they ask me to sign? She didn't hesitate. Read every page. Say nothing. Sign nothing. Then leave with whatever they give you. What if they refuse? They won't. Why? Because people who believe they're manipulating someone usually hand over far more information than they should. I smiled for the first time. Me in days. It was something I had told rookie detectives dozens of times. Never interrupt someone who's digging their own hole. Tomorrow, I wasn't going to ask a single difficult question. I was simply going to let them keep talking. And if Rebecca was right, they were about to tell me everything. The next afternoon, I arrived at exactly 3 o'clock. Not a minute early, not a minute late. Emily opened the door before I could knock. I'm so glad you came. Her voice carried just enough relief to sound genuine. Jason was already sitting at the dining table. The blue folder rested neatly between 2 coffee mugs. No family photographs, no lunch, no small talk, only paperwork. Emily smiled as she sat across from me. We know things have been a little tense. I nodded. They have. Jason rubbed his hands together. We don't want that anymore. Neither did I. Emily carefully slid the folder toward me. We've found the perfect house. I saw the pictures. It's everything we've dreamed about. I'm happy for you. She hesitated. There's just one small complication. Of course there was. The bank needs one final confirmation before closing. I opened the folder without saying a word. Purchase agreement, mortgage disclosures, title estimates, then a single signature page marked with a bright yellow tab. Emily leaned forward. It's really just a formality, I continued reading. She kept talking. The lender only needs confirmation that the property situation has been settled. Property situation. Interesting phrase. Jason finally spoke. Mom, his voice sounded exhausted. You were always planning to leave the house to me anyway. There it was. Not a request, an assumption. I looked up. I was? He blinked. I mean, eventually. Emily quickly stepped in. We're not asking you to give us anything today. No. We just need permission to move forward. I lowered my eyes back to the document. The page wasn't what they claimed, not even close. Buried beneath the legal language was a limited authorization, allowing their lender to verify ownership interests and begin processing documents connected to my property, harmless by itself. Dangerous in context. Rebecca had predicted this almost perfectly. I turned another page, then another, until I reached the attachment. Someone had already filled in every blank except my signature, including one sentence that immediately caught my attention. Current owner intends to transfer beneficial interest to Jason Thomas upon completion of financing. Intends. Not has agreed. Not has signed. Intends. Emily watched my face carefully. What do you think? I closed the folder. I think it's well prepared. Both of them relaxed. Emily even laughed softly. I told you she'd understand. Jason smiled for the first time all afternoon. So, he pushed a pen across the table. Can we sign today? I picked up the pen, rolled it slowly between my fingers. 23 years as a detective had taught me something strange about silence. Most people cannot survive it. They rush to fill it. Emily proved the rule. We've already paid the deposit. Another mistake. Jason looked at her. She kept going. The movers are booked. Mistake number 2. The lender says we're almost finished. Number 3. We're just waiting on this. Number 4. I placed the pen back on the table, very gently. I have a question. Emily smiled confidently. Of course. Which attorney prepared these documents? Neither of them answered. I waited. Jason finally cleared his throat. We used an online document service. I see. It was cheaper. I imagine it was. Emily forced another smile. Everything's completely legal. I'm sure you believe that. The room became very quiet. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Did either of you ever read the restriction recorded against my property after Michael died? Their expressions changed instantly. Not panic, confusion. Real confusion. Jason frowned. What restriction? Emily looked at him, then at me. What are you talking about? And in that single moment, I knew the truth. They hadn't ignored the restriction. They had never found it. Because they had never hired anyone qualified enough to discover it. Everything they had built, every promise, every payment, every plan, rested on an assumption that had never been true. I slowly closed the folder. I think, I said quietly, it's time all 3 of us had a conversation with my attorney. Neither of them spoke, but the color drained from Emily's face. For the first time since this began, she realized the investigation hadn't started today. It had started weeks ago. Jason looked at Emily. Emily looked back at him. Neither of them said a word. It was remarkable how quickly confidence disappears when certainty does. Finally, Jason broke the silence. What attorney? My attorney, I repeated calmly. The one who handled Michael's estate. Emily's posture stiffened. We don't need lawyers. I smiled politely. I think we do. She folded her arms. Linda, you're making this much bigger than it needs to be. No, I'm making it exactly as big as it already is. Jason leaned forward. Mom, nobody's trying to steal your house. I never said you were. We just assumed. I know. His voice cracked. You were always going to leave it to me. I probably was. The room became perfectly still. But probablys isn't a legal document, Emily interrupted. We've already invested almost $80,000. I looked at her. I believe you. The deposit is non-refundable. I believe that too. The movers are scheduled. I'm sure they are. She stared at me in disbelief. Weren't you listening? I was listening very carefully. Then why aren't you helping us? I took a slow breath before answering. Because helping someone isn't the same as protecting them from the consequences of their own decisions. Jason buried his face in his hands. We thought. I know what you thought. You thought the house would eventually become yours. He nodded silently. You thought one signature would be a formality. Another nod. You thought paperwork only mattered after everyone agreed. Neither of them spoke. I opened the folder one last time and removed the authorization page. Then I folded it neatly in half. Rebecca already reviewed this. Emily's eyes widened. You gave this to a lawyer? No. She reviewed the documents after I described what I'd seen. Jason looked up sharply. You've been talking to an attorney for almost 2 weeks. Emily's face lost what little color remained. You investigated us? The question hung in the air. I answered honestly, no. I investigated the paperwork. There's a difference. She laughed bitterly. Of course you'd say that. I spent 23 years investigating financial fraud. I don't investigate people because I dislike them. I investigate facts that don't make sense. Jason's shoulders slumped. So, what happens now? I reached into my handbag and placed a sealed envelope on the table. Rebecca had prepared it that morning. Inside was a certified copy of the property's recorded restriction, along with a legal explanation written in plain English. Jason opened it slowly. Emily leaned closer. Neither of them spoke while reading. Halfway through the second page, Jason whispered, "We can't use the house as collateral." "No." Emily flipped to the final page. "And ownership can't be transferred without—" She stopped reading. "Without your written authorization." "Correct." Jason looked physically ill. So the lender was relying on information that was never legally true. The purchase cannot close under its current terms. Emily pushed her chair back. "This can't be happening. It already has." She stood abruptly. "You knew. I suspected. You could have told us." I met her eyes. "When?" "The first time you hid the blue folder from me? The first time you corrected legal dates by hand? The first time you asked me to sign something without telling me the full story?" She had no answer. Jason looked from me to Emily, then back again. Very quietly, he asked, "Did you ever intend to tell Mom everything?" Emily opened her mouth. Nothing came out. That silence answered him better than words ever could. For the first time since I had walked through the front door, Jason wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his wife, and for the first time he realized that the questions I had been asking were never the real problem. The problem was everything neither of them had been willing to answer. Emily left the dining room without another word. The bedroom door upstairs closed a second later. Not slammed, closed. Jason remained in his chair, staring at the papers scattered across the table. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, "I thought I was taking care of my family." I looked at my son. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't looking at a suspect. I was looking at a frightened man who had confused hope with certainty. "You were," I said quietly. "But you built your future on assumptions instead of facts." He nodded slowly. "I should have talked to you. Yes, I was afraid you'd say no. And because you were afraid of hearing one word, you risked hearing many more." He gave a weak smile. "I sound like one of your old cases." I couldn't help smiling. "You do." He looked toward the staircase. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "I know. We found the house 6 months ago." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Emily fell in love with it. The lender told us everything looked possible, so we kept moving. Every time someone asked another question, we convinced ourselves the next document would solve it." I listened without interrupting. That was something retirement had finally taught me. Sometimes people confess because they are trapped. Sometimes they confess because someone finally lets them speak. Jason continued, "I knew we should hire a real attorney." "So why didn't you?" He sighed. "Emily found an online service. It was cheaper. They said it handled thousands of transactions." I nodded. "And nobody ever checked the original deed, no? The restriction? We never knew it existed." He rubbed his eyes. "I never wanted to lie to you." "You didn't." He looked confused. "You lied to yourself first." Those words hurt him more than any accusation could have, because they were true. 3 weeks later, the purchase contract expired. The sellers accepted another offer. Jason and Emily lost nearly $80,000 in deposits, inspection fees, reservations, and moving costs. Painful, but not irreversible. Rebecca contacted the lender herself. After reviewing every document, they agreed that no fraud had ultimately been completed. Only serious misrepresentations based on incorrect assumptions. The financing application was withdrawn. No criminal investigation followed, not because mistakes hadn't been made, because the truth surfaced before anyone crossed the final legal line. Emily apologized. Not immediately. Not dramatically. She came to my house one rainy Thursday carrying nothing except a folder and a handwritten letter. I blamed your instincts, she said, when I should have respected your experience. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was honest. That mattered. Jason apologized too, not with speeches, with actions. He hired a licensed attorney. He rebuilt his finances one careful step at a time. And, for the first time in years, he started asking questions before signing papers. A month later, Oliver spent the weekend with me. As we planted tomatoes in the backyard, he looked up and asked, "Grandma?" "Yes. Did you catch the bad guys?" I smiled. "No." Then what happened? I placed another small plant into the soil. Sometimes, the best thing a detective can do, is stop good people from making one terrible mistake. He seemed satisfied with that answer. Children usually are. That evening, I sat alone on the back porch with Michael's old coffee mug warming my hands. The maple tree we planted together 20 years earlier swayed gently in the summer breeze. I thought about every case I had ever worked, every forged signature, every hidden account, every clever lie. None of them had ever been as difficult as protecting my own family from themselves. People still joke that I notice too much. Maybe they're right. Old habits don't disappear, neither do the lessons they teach. After all these years, I've learned one truth that has never failed me. Trust is precious. But trust without verification is not kindness. It's surrender. And that is one mistake I will never make again.